morning.
Were you at the Century 16 movie theater in Aurora, Colorado on July 19th and 20th of 2012?
I was.
Could you please tell the jury who you went to the movies with that day?
I went with my friend Carrie Rotman.
Why did you two decide to go to the movie theater?
Just big Batman fans. We had made plans the weekend before, just kind of offhand. Let's go check it out, and then didn't really talk the rest of the week. And Thursday I sent him a text and just kind of last minute said, "You still want to go?" And he said, "Yeah." And so we decided to go.
What time did you arrive at the movie theater that evening?
I got there probably about 25 minutes before the scheduled show time.
What did you do when you arrived at the theater?
We got there. Carrie had bought the tickets online, so he got them from the kiosk, and then just got some popcorn and a Coke, and went into the theater.
Where did you find seats in the theater that night?
When we walked in, the theater was completely packed. Basically, we made turn and looked up to the stadium seating, and about 3 or 4 rows up, there were 2 seats right on the aisle. So we kind of thought we had hit the jackpot, and we sat down, and Carrie sat in the very aisle seat, and I sat in the second seat in.
Your Honor, if I may approach the witness with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1151.
Yes.
Do you recognize that diagram?
I do.
Does it fairly and accurately represent where you sat in the theater on the night of July 20th of 2012, and what else do you recall seeing that night in the theater?
It does.
Your Honor, at this time I'd move for the admission of People's Exhibit 1151.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Without objection, it is admitted and it may be published.
All right, and we're not going to ask to publish at this time. Thanks, Your Honor. Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I ask Mr. O'Farrell to meet me at the 3D model?
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. O'Farrell, if I could ask you to grab that cordless microphone that's up there. Turn that on for me. I'm going to have you stay back here so we don't block the jury's view.
Okay.
All right, could you please show the jury where you and Mr. Rotman were seated?
So we entered right here, walked up, and honestly I don't know the exact row. It was one of these 3 rows here. Carrie was on the aisle seat, and then I was in the second seat over.
Do you know who was seated on the other side of you?
I do. A girl by the name of Jansen Young, and then next to her was a young man by the name of...
Calls for hearsay.
Sustain.
Your Honor, he knew the identification of the people who were seating next to him.
Why don't you establish foundation?
All right, how did you come to meet the people who were seated next to you?
Well, I sat down, and I sat down next to her and saw her, and then didn't really speak to her, but a couple days after the shooting in the hospital, they were...
No object at this point to 401, 402, 403.
Sustain.
All right, so you and Mr. Rotman were seated right here. Please tell the jury about what happened to you in the movie theater that night.
Okay, well, the first thing I saw was the canister go flying across the screen. And I don't know how I knew, but immediately I knew that it was tear gas. I mean, it just seemed so obvious to me. Then immediately my eyes went to see where that came from, and I saw the shooter emerge from here. And he was wearing a gas mask. He was wearing armor from head to toe. He was holding a big gun in his hand, and honestly, I just kind of froze in that second. And I watched him open fire into the front rows there. And, he fired a couple rounds, and my immediate thought was, I just got to get down. So I looked over to Carrie and saw that he was looking around kind of to the left, and I could tell he didn't see where the shooter was or anything. I just said, we got to get down. And we laid down in front of our seats. His feet were in the aisle. My feet were pointing this way. And so we were kind of head to head. And the shots got closer and closer. And honestly, in that moment, all I could do was pray. I laid there and I prayed. And
What do you recall after that, Mr. O'Farrell?
so the first shot I took were fragments from a shotgun that hit me in the left toes. And it really felt like it just blew my toes off. And at that point, I kind of curled up in the fetal position. And then Carrie told me that he had been shot.
What did you do in response to what Mr. Rotman had told you?
All right, the objection is sustained. Go ahead, answer the next question.
I told him that I'm shot too. And at that moment, Carrie and I were laying like this. And then I remember looking up and seeing the laser bouncing around.
And could you
And then-
describe for the jury what you actually saw when you said that you saw a laser bouncing around?
It was like a laser pointer, a little green dot, just bouncing around. I assume it was the sight from his pistol. And then almost instantly, I felt the next shot. He had taken aim and he shot with the pistol round.
Calls for speculation. Sure. Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
And what did you actually see the shooter doing?
Well, I didn't look up at that moment, but I knew that I had been shot. The bullet entered in my arm, shattered my humerus in half.
And Mr. O'Farrell, could I ask you to roll up your sleeve and show
Yeah.
the jury where it was that you were shot?
So a bullet entered right here. You can see the scar. It shattered my humerus in half, and it actually stayed into my bicep. I still carry that bullet today.
So after you had realized you'd been shot, what do you remember next in the theater?
Honestly, at that moment, it was just complete chaos. I remember round after round after round firing, and I really thought that that I was going to die. I laid there, and I'd been shot 3 times at that point. I took another assault rifle round in my same left foot, and it was just round after round after round. It seemed like it was going on for an eternity.
How many shots do you think you heard in the theater that night?
Oh, gosh. I mean, it felt like hundreds. It really did.
At any point in time, did you have an opportunity to look through the seats and see the shooter?
Not after the very first time that I saw him. At that point, I wanted to keep my head down, my eyes closed, and literally just pray. That's all I could do.
And when you saw the shooter in the beginning, could you describe for the jury what the shooter's demeanor was like and what the shooter was doing?
Well, it seemed like slow motion. I mean, he seemed very methodical. Because like I said, I watched him walk in, I watched him fire a couple of rounds, and I never heard him say anything. I never heard anything but the gun going off.
Could you see if the shooter was holding the gun with one hand or two?
He was holding it with 2. I believe it was a shotgun.
All right. So after you were down on the ground, what else do you recall? How did you and Mr. Rotman get out of the theater?
Well, eventually the shots stopped, and Kerry was the first one to peek his head up, and he said, "Let's make a run for it." So we stood up from our spot in the ground, and honestly, gosh, it took all the strength I had just to stand up. And at that point, I believed I'd been shot in the back because the pain just radiated through my entire left side of my body. And I stood up, and Kerry was in front of me, and he made his way down the stairs, and I kind of followed him. But right about this last stair, I just kind of tripped over it and collapsed face first right by the bottom of the stairs there. And honestly, at that point, I didn't have the strength to get up again. And Kerry was shaking me, saying, "Pierce, we got to go, we got to go." And honestly, in my mind, I thought, man, I've been...
Object at this point to 401, 402, 403.
Overruled?
What were you thinking?
And I was thinking, this is it. I mean, I'm going to die here. And I remember thinking, Kerry, you just get out and save yourself. And since I wasn't responsive to him, he exited the theater. And I just laid there. I laid there and I waited. At one point, I felt that dark presence standing over me.
I'm going to object at this point.
Sustained. Station wire after next.
Did you actually see a figure standing over you?
No, I was laying face down with my eyes closed, and I could hear the sounds.
Sustained.
What sounds could you hear?
People screaming, people calling 911. I could hear the movie still running. I heard someone shout out, "Turn off the movie." And I just laid there.
Were you eventually able to get out of the theater?
I was. When the police officers arrived, the first thing I remember was they kneeled down, they had gas masks on, and they had some kind of wand that I
I'm going to
assumed
object at this point to cumulative to the other testimony we heard from first responders in 401, 402, 403.
Ask another question. I will sustain it for now. Ask what happened with respect to him.
All right, so could you describe for her how it was that officers got you outside the theater?
Well, first the officers kneeled down, and they turned me around on my back, and I had an officer at my head, an officer at my feet, and they tried to lift me up. But when they lifted me up by this arm, I mean, the arm was split in half, and the pain was so intense that I kind of shouted, "Hold on, drop me," and I think I can try and walk. And so an officer got on each side of me, lifted me up, and I kind of hopped my way out. They carried me this way and out the same exit that the shooter had entered.
What happened when you got on the outside of those doors?
Well, the first thing I'll never forget is the
Judge, I'm going to
the
interject
rifle.
an objection to relevance as to the environment outside the theater.
Sustained.
And were you placed on the sidewalk outside the theater?
I was placed right on the sidewalk.
All right.
Just for the record, it was sustained under Rule 403, not on relevance grounds. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. I don't have any more questions for you at this time. If you could take your seat
Okay.
back on the witness stand. Thank you. Were you transported for medical attention?
I was.
All right. What hospital did they take you to?
They took me to University Hospital, University of Colorado.
How were you transported to the hospital?
I was transported in the back of a police car.
Do you know who else was in that police car with you?
I do. A girl by the name of Jackie Fry.
What do you remember about that police car ride?
Well, we were driving, and I could see that she had fragments in her
Up to this
face.
point to 403.
Sustained.
What injuries did you sustain as a result of the shooting?
Objection asked and answered. Mr. O'Farrell's already described his injuries and shown them to the jury.
Overruled.
I sustained a fractured humerus in the left arm from a .40 caliber pistol round. I sustained, I guess I'd call it trauma, from shotgun pellets that went into my left toes and cut them up very severely. And then I sustained another wound in the left side of my foot from a assault rifle round.
Did you have any injuries to your chest?
And then I have some fragments of shotgun shrapnel in my chest as well.